Nicholas Nick Metcalf, Sichang Hoyate, one of the Burnt Thigh people, Rosebud Sioux Tribe. Lakota name is Chentangi. What do I do in the world? I work at Metro State University as an assistant professor in social work. So this is my second year on being a tenure track faculty. I finished all my doctoral work last year, and so learning how to be in the academy is what I'm doing. So research, writing, teaching, all that sort of scholarly things. Yeah, that's my community now. I mean, over time, everything has sort of shifted and changed. I was doing a lot of community organizing when my kids were little, and then they took over my life. We were just talking about my kids. So I have two boys. I have Joe, he is 26, and then I have Sunny, Hokshichila Chantemuyuha, who is 24. 6 grandkids, so they sort of take up a lot of my life, which I enjoy. I really do enjoy being a parent, and I enjoy that sort of things. Now I still do community organizing in a very different way, right? This season, a friend of mine and I decided we wanted to play softball, so we joined the Gay Softball League and started an all-native team called Intertribal. So this is our 5th weekend we're playing, lots of raising money, doing sports. I have not played softball in like 40 years. Really, it was right. This is not graceful. This is not pretty. It's not fun.
Is it like back on the res?
Yeah. 92, 93, the first time I came here to the Twin Cities. Absolutely overwhelming. It was, having grown up on the reservation and went to the university at the University of South Dakota in Vermilion, which is a small college town, southeast corner of South Dakota, about 10,000 people. So there was not a lot of gay stuff going on. And sort of visibility was really limited. I remember like the gay bar in South Dakota was sort of this, you had to know where it was located. It was like the only identifying number was the sort of building number. Mm-hmm. And when we first, even the sort of Gay Student Association, we had to go through the psychology department, be interviewed by one of the faculty there to get the location of where the meetings were. Mm-hmm. So very clandestine, very secret. And so my partner at the time and I came to the cities, and we came to the Pride. I remember being overwhelmed, just the sheer number of people, and also feeling at home, right? And one of the things I remember is it felt much more down home, community, there was not corporate sponsors, there was not a lot of those sorts of things. It was a lot more organizers and activists talking about issues. There was a paper, and I'm trying to remember, there was a couple of gay papers at the time. I want to say gay, I forgot what the name of it was. But I had actually come up here because my aunt was in the hospital, and I happened to stop by the gay bookstore, the Brothers Touch, and sort of found a newspaper there and heard about the festivities. So I came up and got to see it. It was amazing. It was simply amazing. I've been involved with the Treader collection for a minute. I donated all of the material when I was at Men of Color there. And from what I recall, it was in the late 60s, early 70s that the Student Association, the students at the University of Minnesota began to gather around and start doing what they called Gay Pride. And evolved over the years in terms of, it was a political action statement, loving each other's not a bad thing, right? And always, one of the things I appreciated about the movement in the beginning was that sort of pushing the edge and what the boundaries were, right? We're here, we're queer, get used to it kind of stuff. And then what I sort of recall, because I came into my sort of understanding of the LGBT community in the 90s in rural South Dakota, then getting involved here in the HIV community. And for me, was really I remember being that young, and there was only one treatment available for folks living with HIV and AIDS at the time. And I spent a lot of time in doing case management, hospice stuff. And one of the things I always think is interesting is that folks don't know it's just like the sheer amount of people that were dying, the regularity of folks dying, the need for care, the stigma. Um, and just like, one of the things too is like when people died, families would sort of come in, clean out houses, and partners were just left in the street, right? And nobody talked about how folks died. And, specifically in the work that I was doing in the Indigenous community, oftentimes people just died of cancer, heart attack, right? Those were the stories that were told. And we just sort of people never really talked about those things. And for me, being in my early 20s and sort of tending to folks who were dying it was surreal. There were not a lot of older people around. Now it's kind of so fascinating to sort of be part of the generation of folks who are older and who are becoming elders in the community, because that's something that we didn't have, right? And one of the things I think the LGBT community doesn't have that same sensibility as a community. And what I've sort of have learned is that, folks have sort of taken for granted the sort of visibility and the outness that we have. Mm-hmm. And even with gay marriage, nothing has changed for us, right? Our community is not any wealthier. We still deal with poverty. We still deal with homelessness. We still deal with, a lot of young people who are on the streets, who are turned out in their families. It's not gotten any better for us. And so, but yet this sort of illusion that sort of is like, oh yes, we have RuPaul's Drag Race. We have all of these sort of social and political movements that have occurred, but the conditions haven't changed, right? And even sort of gay spaces. We still do not have an LGBT center here in the Twin Cities, which amazes me, right? We have such a large population, but we do not have a community center. Like, what is that about? One of the things I think about for me is like space. I mean, even sort of like when I came out, the gay 90s was a gay space, but now it's not. I mean, and people are not shocked at that idea, and even sort of diminishment of space that is specifically for LGBT folks is disappearing. And there's safety in that people tend to forget about, right? There's this assumption that we can go into any place we want and be who we are, but we still get beat up, we still get harassed, we still get made fun of, right? And there's something about being in spaces where we're fully accepted, we can be who we are, we can laugh how we want to, we can present ourselves however we want, that is validating. And I think it's important that we continue to try to sort of hold those spaces and maintain those spaces before we lose them all. Ooh, Howard Ellis. Howard's been around as long as I have been. He's been working in sort of creating, space for the LGBT African American community. Roxanne Anderson, Dennis Anderson, right? I think about like Edward Parra, who has a Latino man, very visible in terms of the AIDS movement, has been public, has really been instrumental in sort of Ryan White allocation and the inclusion of BIPOC people in allocation of those resources. I think of Antonio Cardona, right? Antonio's done incredible work. Justin, and, I think about Richard LaFortune is still around, right? Sharon Day is still around. Deb Williams is still around. And that's specifically to the Indigenous community. The latest sort of incarnation with like the Two-Spirit group and the powwows, which I'm so happy that it has gotten to the space of, we have a Two-Spirit powwow that is in the Indian community, where it's sort of raising our visibility within the Indian community, which for me is incredible, because when early on in my sort of activism, I spent a lot more of my time raising visibility of our presence within the LGBT community. And what I sort of bumped into was a lot of sort of the bigotry and racism that exists within our community, and continues to exist, right? How exclusionary it can be, and all of the sort of the things that happen, and the inability for a lot of our community to sort of grapple with those complexities in terms of even with gender, age, you know, race and sexuality and all those sorts of things. And, you know, one of the things I think about for us, our continued sort of in the BIPOC community is to continue to maintain space for ourselves, to thrive, to develop our voices, to gain some understandings, and to figure out where we're going to sort of put our effort and our energy into, right?
Yes.
And sometimes that, you know, I always say it's like with activism, sometimes being visible is just as essential. Showing up is just as essential. You do not need to always be creating some big project or some huge initiative, or it doesn't have to be this glamorous thing. Sometimes it's just sort of being at someplace and saying, yes, I'm a Two-Spirit person. I'm proud of who I am. These are my people. Here's my story. Now, what do we need to do?